Hi everyone. Today we've got Judith, Bryan and Ariel, Kahn, and they'll be we're lucky enough to have them on a panel today. And Judith is actually winner of the Saga Prize 1997, so that's a huge accomplishment there. And we have Ariel, author of the Raising, let me say this correctly, Raising Sparks, and he's also a lecturer at Middlesex University, and we're all really happy that they've been able to make the panel today. And they're both going to be doing some reading from their books. Judy first, if you don't mind going, and then followed by Ariel.
Okay, fabulous. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming this evening, and thank you, Farmer and the rest of the Middlesex Uni team for inviting me, including Ariel as well, former colleague. Okay, so as Farmer says, we're going to do a short reading. So I'm just going to read 3 and a bit pages from my novel, Bernard and the Cloth Monkey. As Farmer says, this was winner of the Saga Prize in 1997, published in 1998, and it's just been republished by Penguin as part of the inaugural Black Britain Writing Back series, which will be it's planned as a long-running series, but Bernard and the Cloth Monkey was chosen as one of the first 6 books to be republished, selected by Bernardine Evaristo. And this is a novel about 2 sisters in a very dysfunctional family. And the novel meets them as they are young adults. Their father has recently died. Their mother has gone on a cruise to recover from the long period of her husband's illness. And the sisters are alone at home over the course of a long summer, and gradually getting to know each other again and coming to terms with their past. So I'm going to read 2 sections, one from the older sister Beth's point of view, and the second section, which is in kind of a disassociated second person, but which is actually the younger sister Anne's point of view. Okay, so first of all, start with Beth. The sun was directly overhead and getting hotter. The umbrella had been moved 6 times, and each time the bright blazing day had crept around again and knocked the shadow away. Now a small black circle, the exact circumference of the garden table, was all that was left. Wasps buzzed over the remains of the ice cream. An assortment of green and black flies floated in the lemonade. Anne's head tilted back over the top of her deck chair, and her mouth had started to droop. Beth came back from washing the dishes to find her sister snoring gently. Beads of sweat had popped up on her forehead and began to trickle into her ears. Beth gathered up the debris on the table, trying not to clink the glasses. As she reached for the jug, a wasp rose angrily from under the rim and zipped past her face. With a muffled cry, she drew back, her eyes swiveling to see where it had gone. The jug toppled onto the lawn without a sound. Oh, damn. She bent to pick it up. The handle came away in her hand, leaving 2 neat bowls of glass rocking in the grass. Damn, double damn. Beth sat back on her haunches and dangled the handle from one finger. She looked down the long garden towards the house. At the patio her father had laid 3 years ago, with its neat concrete wall. At the hanging baskets and potted plants, now wilting in the heat, despite twice daily watering. At the sticks for the runner beans they didn't plant this year. The rose bushes tied up in preparation for creosote in the fence. And the fence itself, pale brown and splintering, neglected. Despite this, the house was one of the smartest on the street. The windows always gleamed, the paths were always swept, the pebble dash touched up, and the red brick repainted every year. This year was no exception. Only once they'd finished refitting the downstairs rooms, they had had to postpone some of the more fiddly jobs. Not just because Daddy had been too sick to do the work, or because she and Mummy had been so busy. After Daddy came out of hospital that last time, Mummy had wanted nothing at all to disturb his peace. No smells or sounds, and as far as possible, no reminders of what he could no longer do. He had been a long time dying, the old man. He'd wilted and curled up like the flowers. He'd faded and splintered and come apart until he was someone she didn't know at all. And everything that had gone before seemed meaningless in the face of such a death. Because after it, there could be nothing else. No redemption, no renewal, no swinging golf clubs on the deck after all the years of hard work, the years of suffering. That was why she'd insisted her mother use the cruise tickets. It had taken some organising to change the itinerary and get Aunt Vi's name on the documentation in place of her father's. But in the end, it had worked out perfectly. There'd been time for the funeral and sorting out the essential administration immediately after. Time to breathe again before preparing for the holiday. There'd even been time for a family reunion with Anne, but that hadn't happened. She'd been too busy with her studies, she'd claimed. She had to work hard as she was to catch up with her group after her year out, keep her nose to the grindstone, apply herself diligently. Daddy phrases, well chosen. For how could Mummy and Beth argue against the old man's words? And now here she was, snoring peacefully in the sun, as if she'd never been away. And then I'm just going to read a couple of pages from Anne, the younger sister's point of view. It is always summer, and the song of the ice cream van tinkles down the wide streets. Leaves dapple yellow and green, filtering shadows, and the air is as light as sea breezes. They come in distant waves, laughter, the joyful screams of children, chanted rhymes. You can almost smell the salt, a displaced memory from another time, the clatter of the train to Hastings making the pavement shiver. A ball bounces, ticking down the tarmac, metronome of all your days. Time passes, slow and sweet and steady. Run, jump, skip, fly, there is nothing you can't do. The threads of life weave from your fingertips like rainbow-coloured streamers. You are spinning a world, light as a web, casting your net in a shimmering circle. See it vault and hold. See it catch in the branches, let it snare there, a gossamer temple in the treetops for you to find and shelter under whenever you close your eyes. Here are the things you do. Walk the top of the red brick wall and jump. Aeroplane over the playing fields. Hold hands in a human chain and squeal through the cobwebs at the back of the shed. Kiss the best looking boy in the whole school. Win at marbles, win at jacks. You are all things bright and beautiful. Your smile is a thin, bright line stretched as far as it will go. And it goes far, much further than you think it could, getting thinner and brighter all the time. A spider's silk that you stride across, in your spangles and dancing shoes, in your head held high with a flick of the wrist and a turn of the screw. Here are the things that are hidden. Trading sniffs and musky tastes in the toilets at break time. Rifling through crowds of empty coats during assembly. Cheating in tests, stealing sweets from the corner shop, playing knockdown ginger through the flats, fighting. Small crimes all, but crimes all the same. Signs and symbols, shadows of the iceberg, indications. He chants over you like praying, but not to your God. He is the one true God, with his all-seeing eye his masks and his revenges. Repeat after him. You are a bad girl and you must be punished. You are a bad girl and you must be punished. You are a bad, 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 bad girl and you must be punished. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Judith. That's really made me excited for when your book comes out. So I can't wait to kind of continue reading from their different points of views. Yeah.
Fabulous, Mama. And it's actually available right now on from all good bookshops.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, I love that line when authors say from all good bookshop.
Yeah.
I love that line. Thank you. And now we have Ariel, who's going to read a passage from his book called Raising Sparks. And yeah, Ariel, if you'd like to take it away.
Thanks so much, Farmer. So yeah, just a little bit about Raising Sparks. It's my first novel. I wrote it first as a PhD, and then it was published as a result of a competition called Pulp Idol in Liverpool for debut novelists. And it follows a young girl living in a very Orthodox Jewish community in Jerusalem who breaks away. She runs away from home. She falls in first with a cult, and then she ends up working in a restaurant that trains street children, which works with both Arab and Jewish kids. And there's a love story strand as well. And I think what I'll do is read two short pieces from the first chapter, because the first bit is in a sort of realistic mode, and then just to show how it shifts slightly into a more sort of magical mode. So this is from the opening of the first chapter. Every Friday was a race against the light. It moved in a sharp-edged square from the frosted window above the sink, then edged across the table where Malka sat chopping onions. She was trying hard not to cry. The light kissed her fingertips, slipped under her board, and left it floating in a brilliant puddle. If she dived into it, what would she find? Where would it take her? She rubbed her eyes roughly with a forearm, and the dust motes blazed around her like fireflies. The light passed through her unmoved, a door into another dimension, the idea of a window come loose from itself. When it reached the wall behind her, it would blush and fade, another missed opportunity. The ebbing light marked the arrival of Shabbos, and all work ceased. She chopped furiously, half listening to her older sister, Esti, who was telling their mother what she'd learnt that week instead of doing her share. Her younger sister, Devi, stood with her spoon poised in mid-air. Cinnamon poured from the jar in Esti's hand over the braised carrots for the tzimmus. Malka said nothing. Today, Esti seemed charged by the light. Her face was animated. Her dark eyes flashed. We thank God for creating both the sun and the moon. Why do we need both? To teach us how men and women should behave. Men are like the sun, shining brightly in the day, full of action. Women are like the moon, softly illuminating the home and giving way to the shining glory of their husbands. Malka rolled her eyes. Her mother nodded from the sink, wrist deep in noodles for the kugel, her headscarf so askew it seemed to be fighting gravity to stay on her head. Most people ordered their kugel from the local bakery, not her mother. Surreptitiously, Malka tipped the cinnamon-covered carrots into the bin and replaced them with a new batch, which she seasoned carefully. She kept her eyes on her mother. Her one hope of escape from the inane conversation and the sweating brown tiles was if her mother forgot something and sent her out for it. This week, the atmosphere in the kitchen was particularly tense, as Esti's fiancé, Zachariah Gruber, was coming the following night for Sudash Lishis, the final Shabbos meal. No cooking could be done on the Sabbath. Everything had to be completed beforehand. Her mother was a great, if haphazard, cook. and she'd been preparing all week, determined to leave nothing to chance. She dictated endless to-do lists, but in the middle of a stream of ingredients, she'd realized something was missing and look at Malka with entreaty. Could you just pop out a minute, Malkala? Malka tried to make the most of these shopping trips, taking new routes, ducking down unknown alleyways, daring herself to get lost. Anything to delay her return. The apartment always felt even smaller after one of her walks. A broch! Her mother exclaimed, right on cue. We've run out of eggs and onions for the salad. How is that possible? She took down her shopping list from the fridge with each item carefully ticked off and realized she'd written on both sides. I can't believe it. We only bought half the things we need? Don't worry, I'll get them, Malka cried. She sprang up and seized the list before either of her sisters could volunteer. Not that they ever did. Malka wondered if her mother was just trying to get rid of her or sensed her restlessness and was giving her a chance to escape. She was too eager to wonder about it for long. She threw off her apron and crumpled the list and the shekels her mother gave her into her skirt pocket. Malka, your coat! I don't need it, she called, her back over her shoulder. The front door slammed and she was free. Their apartment was on the third floor of a narrow block in the Jewish quarter of the old city. On Fridays, this meant dragging all the groceries up 3 flights of stairs, which stank of boiled vegetables and burnt chicken. As if this wasn't bad enough, she had to do it in the dark. To save electricity, the hall light went on for a few seconds after the switch was depressed before plunging you into darkness. Her arms laden with shopping bags, Malka would jab the ground floor switch with her elbow, then see how far she could get before the light clicked off. Malka shot downstairs, holding her breath. She burst out into the sunlight like a swimmer emerging from underwater, taking deep, gulping mouthfuls of fragrant air, inhaling pine, wet earth, and jasmine. She glanced at the list. Sadly, it wasn't very long. She didn't see why vegetables needed to be kosher, so rather than catch a bus to the market in Machane Yehuda, Malka headed towards the Christian quarter, a route her father had expressly forbidden her to take. The street sloped steeply away beneath her feet, slippery with crushed fruit. The air was thick with the sound of Arabic as the merchants vied with one another to sell their wares. She loved it here. No one noticed her in her uniform of long sleeves, dark ankle-length skirt, and thick, seamed stockings, her red hair swinging over her shoulder in a tight braid. No one except for the coffee merchant at the very edge of the Christian quarter. Her feet always slowed outside his store. Perched on his stool at the door, he nodded cheerfully. With his thick beard and moustache, the merchant wouldn't have looked out of place in her father's synagogue. Each week, he taught her an Arabic phrase. She practiced them at night in bed, rolling the sounds around on her tongue like sweets. She ordered her usual shot glass of steaming Turkish coffee, taking quick sips and inhaling the aromas of cardamom. The trouble she'd be in if she was ever caught here only deepened her pleasure. Salam alaikum. Alaikum salam, Malka nodded in return. With the caffeine buzzing through her, Malka wove through the throng of tourists until she reached her favorite stall, with colorful mounds of fruit and vegetables piled at its entrance. She read through her list and chose carefully, hefting stubby carrots still sprinkled with soil, stroking the onions' papery skins. When she went to pay, she found a young boy of around her own age at the till, a slight mustache blooming above his lip. He looked at her appraisingly. My father is sick, he said in Arabic accented Hebrew. Wish him a full recovery. He frowned at her, puzzled, and slid her change across the counter. She blushed down at her list. In her confusion, she'd answered him in Yiddish. She was meant to keep any conversation with men to a minimum, especially men her own age. No wonder she was making a mess of it. She picked up her bags and turned to leave. Something brushed against her leg. She started back, but it was only a cat. It was a beautiful smoky grey, sleek and well-fed, unlike the hordes of gaunt street cats that haunted the overflowing municipal bins. She put down her shopping list and bent to stroke it, but it backed slowly away from her towards a nearby flight of stairs, keeping eye contact. Its eyes were pale emerald. You want me to follow you? Malka delighted in discovering new corners of the city. Who better to reveal these than a cat? Clutching her shopping, she crept towards it. The cat moved almost lazily up the first 2 steps, then turned to look at her again. She darted forward, but again the cat evaded her. The chase began in earnest. So that's the very opening of the first chapter. And this cat leads her into a house where a young man awaits her. But what I'm going to read is just a little bit of what else she finds in that house, something she doesn't expect. It's magnificent, said Malka. What? Said Moshe. The tree. What tree? He looked at her curiously, his head on one side, just like the cat's. She reached over the railing to show him. The tree had strange crumpled leaves. She pulled one off and smoothed it in her palm. It was covered in writing. She knew then what it was. A capital. Growing up almost in its shadow, she went to the Western Wall in Jerusalem almost every day. Jews traveled from all over the world to pray here, and so they wanted to leave something of themselves behind. They wrote out their most fervent hopes, things which they didn't dare to say aloud, and slipped these paper prayers, or kapitelach, into the cracks between the ancient stones, pressing these furled buds of longing together so tightly the huge stones seemed held aloft by prayers alone. Perhaps they were. She had seen the kapitelach dusted with snow and dripping with rainwater, painted rose by the dawn, or glowing and ghostly in the moonlight. Someone had been collecting them, bringing them here and attaching them to this huge tree, but who and why? She stroked the capital flat, trying to see what was written on it, but it clenched itself tight like a fist and then lifted from her palm as if caught in a wind. A roaring filled Malka's ears of many voices speaking at once. It was coming from the tree. The air around her grew thick and warm as bathwater. She gasped. All the kapitelach on the tree had begun to open and close in unison, beating like tiny hearts. Each called aloud the prayer inscribed upon it in languages familiar and unknown. As she watched, a clump of paper prayers tore themselves free and circled above her like a huge bird. The beating grew fiercer, the crying louder. They were all chanting the same word now, over and over. Ayeka, Ayeka, Ayeka. It was the first question in the Torah, the one God asks after Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge. Where are you? Malka felt it was being asked of her. She didn't know how to answer. She bit her lip, and the taste of iron filled her mouth. The whirling prayers darted arrow-like towards her. Moshe made no move to help. She screamed and hurtled down the stairs towards the door. She slammed it behind her and heard a sound like hailstones hammering against the door. The prayers were trying to get out, trying to get to her. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ariel. Malka, the main character, I think she, from what I know so far of the story, and I think she's in for quite an adventure and quite a discovery and escapism, and that's what it sounds like she's been looking for. So I think she's bitten off more than she can chew. But yeah, that sounds quite exciting. But we've got some questions. If and from what I've heard from the both of you, it sounds like quite some research did go into books. So I guess my first question is, how did you come up with the story for your book? Yeah, when you're writing. I guess I'll go with you, Ariel, since you've just finished it.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Val, for your questions and your kind comments. So I think I approached this story in different ways. research can go back a long time, the seeds of it. I part of a family with 4 sisters. I'm the only boy and the oldest. And originally, I was supposed to be a rabbi. I went to Israel to study for a few years, came back and decided I didn't want to do that. But I always wondered, what would it be like if a young woman of great gifts and potential was born into an environment where she couldn't recognize them, she couldn't appreciate those. And then I was going to study English for my first degree. And one of the things I read to prepare was an amazing essay by Virginia Woolf called A Room of One's Own. She imagines what would it have been like if Shakespeare had a sister as talented as he? And the answer is nothing. We'd never have heard of her because she was a woman. And I thought about this very Orthodox community, which has amazing things in it, but it's very narrow, especially if you're female. So that was one part of the research and the thinking about this. But then actually just before our first child was born, my wife, who's also a writer, and we went away for a few days. We hoped with the calm before the storm, and to a little cottage in Suffolk. And I was sitting in the garden, and a cat walked past me along the wall, and I looked at the cat, and suddenly I saw it almost like a movie. It was walking along the streets of the old city of Jerusalem, where I'd lived for a year or so, and the girl was following this cat. And I thought, who is this girl, and why is she following the cat? So sometimes, that visual image led me to then research more about the world that this girl lived in and who she might be.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I had asked you to unmute me, but I'm fine. I managed to unmute.
Oh, okay, great.
Sorry
Great.
about that, Ariel. As you were talking, I was desperately trying to unmute myself. But I did hear you with that sense of fragments, things coming at different times at different points and converging this way in which an idea can build over time when you're not even necessarily aware that you're thinking about stuff, but that observation of the world, that sense of experience that just bit by bit builds to a realization that you want to write a novel about something. I really love that.
Yeah, that's funny. I get the same feeling as well when I'm trying to write like a short story, and then all of a sudden a memory comes into your head that you kind of incorporate, but at the time you would have just thought, oh, it's nothing.
Yeah.
But then it's a bit like Ariel's saying right now.
Yeah.
I guess I'll ask you the same question as well. How do you come up with ideas for your books?
Well, for this novel, I trained as a social worker. I'm a qualified social worker, and I worked in social work for a number of years. And my very first job on leaving university was in a called an independence training centre for young women leaving care. And after that, I then went and worked in a children and family unit, did fostering and adoption and so on. So I was doing lots of stuff around family and troubled families. And when I was at university, one of the things that we talked about was the cycle of deprivation, and this idea that if a child comes from a troubled background, that the likelihood is that sense of dysfunction and trouble and difficulty will carry on to the next generation. And this always kind of troubled me, because that kind of wasn't my experience, both in terms of, even in terms of the people I worked with, but in terms of friends and family, that there wasn't a sense in which it was inevitable that children from troubled backgrounds would inevitably recreate those family dysfunctions when they had their own children. And so there was that sense of, as a social worker, having ideas and thinking through things and not being sure about them, kind of, wishing I could kind of think some more about that. For me, writing is always an opportunity to think. It's a way of trying to work out what I think and what I understand and what I believe, I suppose. And so there was that. And one of the things that I came across as a student was a series of behavioral experiments by an American behaviorist called Harry Harlow. And I won't go into the whole thing now. You can Google it and find out about Harry Harlow and the cloth monkey. But it was this idea that there is a sense of good enough parenting, and particularly mothering. So it was very interesting exploring ideas about separation, maternal separation, and how children survive and cope with family trouble, family dysfunction, the things that they use to support them through that, and the way they kind of can recover from that. And I suppose I also became a mother around this time as well. So it was a way of thinking through ideas around the family that I'd been thinking about for some time.
Yeah. That's interesting, because it's through experiences that some of these ideas come to be. So it's interesting because it happens over a period of time. How do you then sort of store all these ideas? Because a memory might come to you here and there, but then it's always a good idea. It's much more efficient if you have it written somewhere, or stored somewhere that you can get to. How do you how do you store these ideas?
Yes, notebooks, absolutely.
So, yeah, I've got it. It's a great question, as you say. I mean, and I think it's also about respecting that creative part of yourself, making space for it. So I started keeping notebooks. These are for a new story that I'm working on, and each character has kind of their own notebook. But
it's interesting. Each character.
Yeah, it just came because they've got sort of different. Then I know, okay, if I want to write, so there's general sort of plot ideas, but then as the more you work on anything, the more comes up. So how does a character sound? I often find also, if I write stuff like just before I go to bed, especially if I'm not sure if I'm stuck on something, if I've got an issue of a kind of plot or something, if I sleep on it, sort of my unconscious mind kind of joins the party. And often, not always, when I wake up, then I have more ideas. But definitely, as you say, recording things so you can look back on them, so you can fix them, because also then you make space for other ideas. Whereas if you just leave them in your head, they just spin around, like planes waiting to land. Whereas here they've got their their landing strip in this little notebook, and then once they're done, new ideas can come out too.
Yeah. That's so true. That's so true. And
I think that's right.
Sorry, Judith.
Sorry. I think that's right. I think the thing to bear in mind is that writing a novel it's a big enterprise, and it takes quite a lot of time, and the ideas evolve over that time. You don't necessarily know everything you don't know everything that's going to be in the book at the outset. And so if by using notebooks, by doing things like making a note, as Ariel says, before you go to bed, and allowing your subconscious mind to work on it. I usually keep a notebook under my pillow when I'm mid-project, because things will pop up in the middle of the night that I just have to write down a sentence here, a sentence there, and then you will see things, as Ariel did with the cat. Things will happen, you'll overhear a conversation, you'll see something. So over the course of the novel, you're pulling together all of these threads, and it's about kind of, as Ariel says, opening yourself up to those new ideas to come in, and to trust that very kind of organic process, really. Yeah.
So I'm guessing all these ideas, both of you do write on choose pen and paper rather than, for instance, your phones or the laptop. Because I'm the same. Like, I can write my ideas on a phone or on a laptop, but it just doesn't feel good enough. Like, my mind tells me, no, that's not good enough. You've got to write down with pen and paper. I'm guessing it might be the same for you two as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love about a notebook is that no one can send you an email on it. So,
Ah,
you can be
yeah,
sitting in the garden or in the park or, somewhere. It's saying this space is only for me.
yeah,
Um, but also there's this, what you're talking about, the tactile thing of actually writing by hand. I mean,
yeah.
I then type things up and, print them out and annotate them. But yeah, the first place, the first sort of home for my stories is definitely on paper with pen. How about you, Judith?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely paper and pen.
Mm,
I'm much less organized than you, Ariel. I will write things in one notebook and then start another notebook, and I've got stuff all over the place. I literally write on the back of envelopes sometimes and have to then stick that in the back of my notebook. And I've tried to think about being more organized, but actually I think the disorganization kind of works for me. I just have to be attentive to the fact that I might have written something down somewhere, rather than reinventing the wheel all the time.
I mean, I think I might be giving a false impression of how organized I am, because the other thing I often have to do is look back at what was I actually reading at the time, because like I just opened like the back of one of my books. It's full of notes, nothing to do with the book, but just the story. Like while I was reading it, I got these ideas and nothing else was around, so I just wrote in the back of this. So yeah, there's that kind of organized chaos, which I think is a healthy part of creativity.
I think so. And sometimes it's not necessarily about having being able to recover those notes physically. I think that sometimes just the act of having scribbled something down means that somehow it's entered into your process. And sometimes I'll hunt around like you for something that I know I've written somewhere. No idea where it is. It might be the back of a book. It might be in a scrap of paper, and I might not find it. And I will drive myself crazy looking for, and I just have to accept it's okay, it's fine, it's in there somewhere, and it will always pop back up again. There's something about the physical act of writing, something about embodying the thinking process through putting pen to paper, I think just kind of helps to keep you in a kind of instinctive, organic state through the process of writing. And there's something quite kind of mysterious about it and kind of chaotic, but creatively chaotic.
This has given me an insight into how I do things sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, I can't find what I'm looking for. I can't get the words down exactly. And I think to myself, but you've just had it a minute ago. So I don't know, I guess it's got something to do with like being creative and writing. So I know I'm not crazy because, experienced people are telling me now, so I definitely know that. Just go with the flow.
Yeah.
But then that kind of brings me into your writing habits. So say you've got to be really organized, or you've got to get like you've got a deadline and then in terms of your writing habit, are you more of someone who will sometimes sit down and try to get as much done as possible, or will you just sort of go with the flow? I think the word is pantser. I'm not sure if that's a very familiar word with everyone, but yeah, but in terms of like your writing habit, are you someone who kind of sits down and doesn't want to be disturbed, and you're somewhere in a place that's like really quiet, or you can just write anywhere?
So a good question, interesting one. I guess there's a kind of pre-lockdown answer to that, which is that
Oh, true.
I love to write in cafes or busy spaces, so I can kind of look up and see life. I get quite energized by that. I'm a morning writer, and I try and aim for around so at least 1,000 words a session. They're not necessarily all going to be good, and they might not survive the next day. And like you said, going with the flow. Some days that's easy, and some days I just don't manage. So I just try, and some days I do more. I just try not to beat myself up and say, look, as long as I'm keeping going with it. I mean, the other thing is if I'm stuck on a given day, or even if I'm not, I'll just often start by looking at what I wrote before. And one thing I'll do to help almost like a present to myself tomorrow, is I'll often stop what I'm writing just before a really exciting scene. So I know that the next day I'll be looking forward to writing it.
Yeah.
So I won't kind of write out everything that I'm thinking or feeling on that day. It's like passing the baton on to your next day self. And sometimes it just doesn't happen. So then I'll just, go for a walk, or, take time off or read something else, but having faith to keep trying. Because I think just like the notebook physically, if you make time for this part of yourself, I'll make sure that particular times where I write well are clear. And obviously sometimes that's easier than others, but it's almost like a writing date. I say, right, these, and again, different stages of the writing process. Sometimes you need more immersion, like, when you're coming to the end of a draft or you want to reread through something. But generally, I'd say that's my process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very similar. Nothing to add really. It's very much like that, even to the the 1,000 word count. If I get 890 on a day, or even 500, sometimes it's like, well, that was a good day. If it's been if it's been like pulling teeth, because sometimes it is like that. I think there's a lot about showing up to the page. If I'm working on something, I try to be consistent. I try to work most days. If I've got a deadline, I will sit there for hours and get it done. But as Ariel says, sometimes you can't force it. And it's better to go for a walk or do something else and allow your subconscious to work. But writing is work. And sometimes it's hard work and you have to push through. No one said it was going to be easy.
Yeah, I think the scary part for me, like when I'm writing my short stories, is I know that I'm pushing through and I'm writing, but then in my head I'm thinking, oh God, please, when I do read this, let it sound good, because it's that thing where you go and then come back and you see that you've either written something good or you've got to start again, and then and that's a bit scary. And in terms of like sort of redrafting and having to redraft again, are you someone who reads your own work out loud, or will you just kind of read it quietly, or is it another form of like trying to work out how you should redraft what you've done previously?
Yeah, I read my work aloud as I'm writing it, to get things right, to hear what it is I'm writing. If I'm struggling with something, I say it out loud. But I draft and redraft. I don't really worry if it's bad, especially not in the first draft. I know it's going to be bad, and I don't really care about that. What I'm trying to do is make progress. A colleague of ours, former colleague of both of ours, Leonie Ross, one of her sayings that she got from somebody else was progress, not perfection. And that is my watchword. Sometimes I'm just writing down words. I'm just moving forward. I'm just writing a scene, however badly, in order to get that done. Because I actually, at the point when I'm writing, I'm actually not thinking about public reception. So I'm not really thinking about good or bad. I'm thinking about, making progress in the telling of the story. The refinement, good and bad, comes after. So yeah, I don't overjudge my writing at the point when I'm first drafting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel it's almost like a kind of sketching process that a visual artist might undertake, where like my first draft is relatively quick. It's just a kind of overview, blocking out, what's happening in a particular scene or sequence, and I almost discover what's happening as I'm writing it. Like Fama, your question. So I'll often try then to read bits aloud, just to hear how it sounds, and that will often help me sharpen things up a little bit. So that will be the next day. I'll sort of revise that scene, and then probably if I finish a sequence or a chapter, a few pieces together, then I'll sort of read through that chapter if it's a chapter and kind of just join the pieces together. And I guess there are different stages then, once you've but trying to get a whole draft, as Judith says, it takes a lot of time. Sometimes you have to leave it, come back to it, but yeah, I think reading aloud, as you suggest, is actually really helpful, because you hear how the character sounds. But there are other kinds of activity that you can do, I think, to get in character. I mean, I once really annoyed my family standing in a supermarket, because I was like, because there's a lot of food. I love cooking. There's a lot of food in this novel. And I was like, well, would this character choose this pepper or this pepper? And they're like, we don't care, just take a pepper, you know. Except, but so there's something also about, because Judith was talking about embodying the words in a notebook. There's sometimes something about embodied research, you know, going to a place where a character might be kind of being in an environment that relates to your story in some way. So it's almost like you're surrounded by it.
Yeah.
Sometimes when that doesn't happen physically, I do it through music. So for instance, this novel, Raising Sparks, it's set in Israel. And so I listened to a lot of music in Hebrew, a lot of music from Israel. And that helped me then just get into that mode and feel like I was back there.
Yeah.
That's definitely really interesting, because that's something that I've done as well. Is for instance, a story that I've written that's set in like a police cell. I luckily have never been in a police cell. So I've started watching shows that kind of, you know, give me an idea of what it would be like. So I suppose that's the same thing that you're doing with your music, and you know, and yeah, and just to kind of have a better idea of how a character, for instance, should behave and things like that. And then
these are all forms of research, and so it's, you know, that of course it's necessary to do book research, textual research, factual research, but you know, for creativity you have to also research in creative ways as well. And there is so much which is about the body, about the senses, and about connecting to the world, so that the world comes back into your text. So that your text isn't just the set of ideas. It may start with ideas, but it has to then kind of evolve. So your characters have to become fully fleshed, really. And the only way that that can happen is if you kind of take them into the world with you, and then bring the world back onto the page.
Yeah, beautifully put.
Is there one?
Okay, you've frozen, Farmer.
Okay, so I'm gonna take over just until hopefully Fama gets back. I'm not sure what she was gonna say, but I'll just start with. Oh, she's back. She's back.
I don't know what keeps happening to my internet. So sorry.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the trip.
Wow. Quick trip around the moon, you know. But yeah, I was just gonna ask, in terms of like the audience, at what point do you sort of think is a good idea to start thinking about how they would react to your story, or the emotions that you'd like them to feel?
I suppose I think about my audience as in a very kind of general sense. I don't kind of target, I don't write for a target audience as such, but I try to remember that the world of my, I want to invite readers in. I try to remember that I know what's going on inside my head, but my readers only have what's on the page. And I only kind of think in terms of clarity. Is what I intend to say clear on the page for readers? And I think that's as much as I kind of think about audience, really. I think that, you know, writing is about communication, and it's about ensuring that what you intend to say can be heard. And of course, readers will have their interpretation and their own understanding. But I think as a writer, your job is to kind of, you know, be really clear about what it is you intend to communicate. And so that's as far as I kind of go in terms of audience. How about you, Ariel?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you were talking about, you know, that sense of communication. I think for me, it goes in two directions, because sometimes I feel I'm writing the book I would have liked to have read at a particular stage, but wasn't there. So it's almost like that's the inner voice that I'm writing for. As you say, I think writing a story, I don't really think about an audience, except, as you put it, that I want to make somebody who doesn't know what I'm talking about able to enter that world. I mean, people could probably tell even from the little bit that I read that the world that my main character lives in is very specific. They don't speak English. There are other languages in the book and other cultures. How do I communicate that so that someone who knows a little bit about it could still enjoy it, and someone who knows nothing about it could still enjoy it? It's almost like, I feel like the books that I most love teach me how to read them.
Yes.
And they respect me as a reader by making space for me to enter and be part of the story rather than telling me too much. So I guess, I'm writing back to, maybe a past self, but also writing to communicate and empathize with my characters in a way that I hope will be pleasurable and allow readers to empathize with them too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That just made me think. So in a way, would you say that you write to intrigue people, either about something that they don't know about, and then as a result sort of do more research into, for instance, you said your book is set in Jerusalem. There's a lot of people who, don't know very much about Jerusalem. So would you say after they've read that, the intriguing, would you want to intrigue them to find out more about Jerusalem, or, and I'm sure there's many other things in the book as well. Would you say that's something that you want your audience to sort of be intrigued to do?
So it's a good question. I mean, I think part of what makes me get out of bed and want to write more is I want to find out not just what happens next, but something about how my characters growing, how are they experiencing this place? And because my main character in this novel is she's trapped in a very small world she wants to break out of. So when she does manage to break out of it, everything she sees, it's as if for the first time. It's like, when you travel to a new place and you don't filter out anything, you see so much. And it's like, well, how do you absorb all of that? So what I love about books that I've read, books from India, or books from Africa, books from places that I haven't been, is that I feel I'm being invited to see how do the characters in this story experience this place. So it's almost not a place that I can go and visit because it's their version of that place. And I guess what I want to communicate or get people excited about is, how does someone here who lives and grows up in Jerusalem, how does she see this place? How does she relate to the different parts of the city? And for it to come alive through her. But as you say, there's hopefully a sense of excitement and discovery for the character. And then I'm hoping also for the reader.
Yeah, I think that's it. Am I? Oh, I thought I was on mute. I suppose the thing that I want to ask you now is, everybody is inspired by something, or someone. Who are who are the authors that you look up to, and who inspire you the most? If I could go to you, Judith, first.
Right. Okay. I have a range of influences, I think, both fiction and non-fiction. It's interesting, Ariel's book is so much about religion, faith, belief, and how those things are informed by culture as well. And I think that's one of the things I was very kind of interested in as a young reader. One of my books I read early on was Edmund Goss's Father and Son, which is an autobiography. It's a memoir of a father. It's a father and son in a very kind of devout Christian household at the end of the 19th century. And this novel just really engaged me, really excited me. Just not novel, rather, memoir, and just I think created a kind of lifelong interest in both faith and family. I don't have a faith myself, but I'm very interested in how faith operates in families and that operates in culture, and how it kind of shapes people. So there was that. The letters of Van Gogh to his brother, completely obsessed with those. Again, family and mental illness and creativity and a kind of a visionary relationship to the world. These are the things I think are kind of underlying my kind of creative practice. In terms of fictional authors, Toni Morrison, always, all day long.
Yeah.
You know, it's the history, it's her relationship to history, it's her relationship to language, the way she expresses her ideas, that this kind of tangential, kind of elliptical way of telling stories, and yet everything is actually on the page and really clear, and ideas are challenging. It's all of that, yeah. So yeah, those are just three, but a long kind of Gothic tradition as well. Rebecca, Wuthering Heights, all these kinds of stuff. You know, drama, conflict, families again. You know, things being quite kind of heightened and intense. Lawrence for the same reason. Yeah.
Oh, you've definitely given me some authors to add to my list there.
Sure.
I guess Ariel, I'd ask you the same questions. Or who are authors that inspire you, and you know, who you look up to as well?
Fantastic. Yes, I mean, I guess like Judith, it's a sort of evolving relationship, isn't it? With what's. But I remember when I was at the end of high school, we read James Joyce's first novel, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and like Judith was saying, it's all about kind of faith and struggle. And Joyce talked about trying to, you know, he was doing all kinds of interesting experiments in the form of the book, but really I was really connected to what he called the curve of an emotion, that was the shape of his story. It was a journey of a young man in a totally different world to mine that I could relate to. I found that absolutely fascinating. And then when I started writing this book, I was reading a great Yiddish author who's translated into English, Isaac Bashevis Singer, very prolific short story writer, novelist. He was a kind of refugee from Eastern Europe to America and kind of wrote there in Yiddish, but his stories, I mean, I think Ted Hughes, the British poet translated, was the first translator of one of his pieces. Really powerful, really resonant, really evocative. But I'm also interested in and also has that magical element that interests me, but also I'm really fascinated by hidden stories and unvoiced perspectives. So the American short story writer Raymond Carver, who writes in a very realist mode, he comes from a working class background. His stories are working class stories, but they're crafted and beautiful and moving. And there's something about paring away things, so there's space for a story to open up in the reader's mind, that really inspired me. And I guess, if you know, thinking about short stories, the other great and really mysterious short story writer who I love is Kafka, Franz Kafka, who's he can't write a bad short story, but also you can never figure out really what is he saying, what does the story mean. You keep coming back to things. They're so mysterious, but yet grounded in a world that I know. So it kind of, I guess the stories that I love make me look at the world around me through new eyes and to notice how mysterious it actually is. And I think that sense of joy and wonder are so precious, you know, even more so now maybe. But so many other writers, I mean, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who's a brilliant South American, you know, so-called magical realist writer, but someone who really evokes a culture. Arundhati Roy, who I heard, you know, writes beautifully about, you know, India, but is also quite active politically. And one last writer would probably be David Grossman, the Israeli contemporary novelist and short story writer, who said that for him, literature is an empathy machine, that it's about trying to create and engender empathy. And I feel that that's even more precious now in terms of building communities and understanding.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly, that's especially now. I think a lot of people feel that. I'm just gonna go to the audience questions because I've seen quite a few questions come up. And I think everyone's quite excited to ask them. Ooh, I can't see them. Just a second.
Do you want me to ask them because I've got them on screen?
Yeah, if you've got them, because I can't seem to see them now. Don't know what's happened.
No problem. So our first one's for Judith, and it's from Martin McGrath. He says, I'd like to ask Judith about the way her book works with the idea of our imperfect and partial memories. It sometimes left me confused but never lost, if that makes any sense. It is often how I feel in real life. The question is, how difficult was that balance to achieve? And did it emerge organically in the writing, as it feels, or was it carefully planned?
Oh, I think I'd love to say it was carefully planned, but it was much more instinctive. The sense of memory being unreliable, and family memories especially being kind of contested. So that in this novel, there's two sisters have very different experiences within the same family. And they're very, very close in age. As close in age as they can be without being twins. They've been literally like 9 months apart. And yet they have such profoundly different experiences within the family. And I wanted to kind of get a sense of, create a sense of texture in the text so that we have these two narratives interweaving, and also this sense of this third, slightly disassociated second person voice as well, to create that sense of uncertainty, destabilization. It's interesting what you say about the kind of, both being lost and not lost within the text. And I suppose I wanted the story to kind of build through this kind of these impressions and these kind of contested, opposed and slightly ambiguous perspectives in the novel.
Oh, that's okay, Alex. Thanks for your help. And we had a second question for both Judith and Ariel. And it was, how and when did you both know that you wanted to write novels as opposed to short stories or anything else in literature? Ariel, should we go with you first?
Sure. Yeah, I can give Judith a break for a minute. Yeah, it's an interesting one because I started, writing poetry and short stories. A novel always felt, it's such a big beast. Although I loved reading novels above everything else. I think actually when I had a short story published and I suddenly thought, oh, I should write a novel. That's the next step. I wasn't really sure how to do it. And I tried, and I think I didn't do a very good job. I wrote a novel I really wasn't happy with because I didn't quite care enough. It was like the idea of wanting to write a novel. And that was really, I realized, the wrong way to approach it. Whereas with this story, I felt a connection to the character. And I realized that for her to go on her journey, it was going to need space and time. And so I thought, okay, right, this probably will be a novel. So I guess that's, a good 10 years ago now that I sort of thought, okay, this is something I really want to invest in. And I think for the first time, I also wanted to plot it because I thought, well, with a short story, I didn't need to plan as much. And Judith mentioned colleague Leonie Ross, who I think is speaking at another of these events tomorrow night. I really invite people to come back if you've enjoyed this, because she's wonderful too. So she actually was running a course at the City Lit in Covent Garden called Taming the Monster, which was about plotting. Now, my actual novel didn't match the plot that I wrote. It was almost like I tricked my rational mind and said, okay, yeah, I know what's going on. Like the actual ending of my story was completely different to the ending I imagined, but it gave me a shape, a sense of this is what I need, how I need to move forward to craft something sustained.
Yeah, it's interesting. You just reminded me as well, like when you plot something, it doesn't always go that way. Like for instance, I've I've written a plan, and then I've come to write it, it's gone on a completely different direction. And to me, sometimes that's one of the nicest surprises that you can have as an author, because not even even yourself, you don't know how that's gonna end up, how that's gonna go. So yeah. So, but it is still quite nice because you can still surprise yourself as if you're the reader.
Yeah, beautifully put. Yeah, I really agree with that.
Yeah. So I suppose, Judith, the same question to you as well. How do you decide to write a novel rather than a short story, or or a poetry, for instance?
Well, I write across all those forms. I started with poetry. I'm not really a poet, I don't think, at all. But I think I started small and just got bigger, and I realized that my ideas tend to be quite big. I've also written plays, and I think I write plays like a novelist. It was really challenging for me to learn to write plays. It's a completely different way of telling stories. But I think I'm really interested in deeply exploring an idea, a set of characters, and a scenario. And I think that novel does that best. It creates that sense of interiority, and because it's long form, you can explore, more deeply, and on a kind of broader canvas. Not necessarily a long time. A novel could be set over an hour, a novel could be set over a day, but it's the depth of your exploration that long form allows. And I think that's just the way I think. I mean, I can write short stories, and I do write short stories, but I like the novel form for long form thinking.
Yeah, I really like what you said. It's about the depth that you go into. For instance, when you set your story in one place, and then it kind of forces more creativity out of you, because you're having to go into so much more detail. You're having to know your character really, really well. Yes, I really, really like that. I think it's quite a challenge as well. So anyone who does that, literally props to you, because it's a challenge. I just seeing if we have any more questions. I guess my last question to you both is, what advice would you give to any new writers out there, or anyone trying to make it as a writer?
Okay, I'm going to start with this one. For me, there's a practice and learning a craft. So there's two things. You learn to write by writing and by reading. I know Ariel is also a prolific reader. I began as a reader, and my first novel, I think, is very much a reader's novel, and all my kind of influences are there. So I think you must read and you must write. But I'm also very kind of passionate about craft, very serious about craft. And I've attended lots of writing classes and writing courses, the City Lit, Arvin Foundation, Spread the Word courses, Working Men's Institute. So lots of adult education classes in London. And these give you the kind of technical skills that you need in order to communicate the things that you want to communicate, and to communicate them well. And to learn to improve through successive drafts. So the practice of doing, and then some education, some information, so you can refine your doing. Yeah, and reading is one of the key ways to do that. Yeah.
Yes, I think exactly as Judith says, it's a craft. Yeah. So, and so that dynamic relationship between reading and writing is really important. Judith said earlier, I think just show up and write, make space and time for yourself, use physical things that, places that help you or kind of get you in the right space. And I mean, Fama also said that in a way you take risks and you surprise yourself. You might plan something and then something else comes up. So almost ought to honor and respect that. And give yourself permission also to make mistakes, because it's not going to be perfect, even at the very, very end, where, you know, you think, okay, this is really close to how I imagined it in my head. But often you'll just, you know, I mean, the great Irish novelist and playwright Samuel Beckett, in one of his Malone novels, he says, you know, fail again, fail better. You know, that it's that process of trying something. And it's also, I think, almost like a muscle, like, you know, being a musician, you kind of practice, and then when the flow is there, it can just come out. And then it's almost, I would also say, honor each stage separately. So I would never try and edit something or fix it while it was just happening, you know, an early draft. Just let it come out, see what's there. Have the editor head is almost a separate critical hat to wear at a different stage. Because if you're trying to edit something while you're writing, it's just not going to happen. So I would almost honor those different stages. They happen in different places. You know, the editing, I would, for me, is also on the computer. The early writing is, you know, by hand on a notebook. But also to remember that this is fun, to enjoy the process, because, you know, there are ups and downs. There are times where you can get very frustrated, but there are also those lovely moments to hold on to and remember, and to allow yourself to enjoy both sides of that process.
Yeah, definitely true. That's really good advice. And if I may say, if you have any early drafts as well that, you know, that you're not so happy with, still keep them, because I used to do that, and I mean, I've done that, and oh God, to this day, that it's one of the worst things I've ever done, where I've thought this is not good enough, and I've literally ripped it up and thrown it away. So I wish I'd kept that. So if you're at that stage, just keep it, because then you're going to see your development, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things to see as well. But yeah,
I've just finished a novel that I started in 1998-99 and put down after about 7-8 years because I couldn't make it work. I picked it up last year, and the last time I had done any work on it was 2004-2005. So I look back at this earlier draft with some annotations that had been given to me by a writing mentor that I used for a year. And I just realized that I just needed to continue working. I just stopped working too soon. So if I'd thrown that draft away and given up in despair, you know, this is after nearly 2 decades. If I'd thrown that away, I wouldn't have the text to build back up and to rewrite. And it took a year to rewrite it, something that I hadn't been able to work on for a long time. So yeah, without having kept that draft, I wouldn't now have another novel finished. It's really important to keep the drafts. Yeah,
an amazing story.
You never know when you're going to be able to, you know, something that you couldn't make work that you might be able to work.
Amazing. See, so definitely worth keeping. So I want to say a huge thank you to you, Judith and Ariel, for being with us tonight. And as you heard Judith say, you can find their books in all good bookstores. And yeah, and hopefully looking forward to speaking with you guys sometime soon as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faman. And it was wonderful speaking with Judith. Thank you, everybody who's been watching, listening. And yes, Judith's novel is a wonderful one, one that's already published. It's come out from Penguin. Really urge you to read it. It's really wonderful. And my novel, Raising Sparks, is published by Blue Moose. And just as Judith said, that phrase that Farmer loves, is available in all good bookstores or from the publisher Blue Moose themselves. And thank you, everyone, for coming along.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Farmer and Alexandra and all the other organisers.
Thank you for coming.